Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. Story 1. The Demon in the Dark.
I woke up in the dead of night, my body frozen. My eyes were wide open, but I could not move a single muscle. The room felt wrong, darker than usual, as if the shadows had thickened, pressing down on me like a suffocating weight. Then I saw it. A figure loomed at the foot of my bed, its form shifting like smoke, its eyes empty voids that swallowed the dim light from the hallway. The air grew heavy, thick, with the scent of decay. I tried to scream, to move, but I was trapped. My own body was a prison. The thing crept closer. My breath hitched as unseen hands wrapped around my wrists and ankles, pinning me down. Cold, skeletal fingers pressed against my chest, and a horrible pressure built in my ribs, as though something was trying to sink inside me. A guttural whisper slithered into my ears, a voice not meant for this world. Mine. My heart pounded. My vision swam. The shadows seemed to coil around me, pulling, dragging. I knew I was seconds away from being lost. Then in sheer desperation, I forced out a prayer, not to myself, not as a plea, a command. Saint Vikas, Lav Krashenitnikov, protect me, guardian angel, shield me. Thatokos Virgin Mary, intercede for me. The moment the words left my mind, the entity shrieked, a horrible, ear-splitting wail that reverberated through my skull. The fingers on my chest burned as if seared by fire, and the shadow writhed violently, recoiling as though struck. The pressure lifted, and air flooded my lungs. I gasped and bolted upright. My body was mine again. The room was empty. The darkness had receded, retreating into the corners like a wounded beast, but I knew it had been real. I could still feel the ghostly imprint of hands on my skin, lingering like a fading bruise. I have never doubted again. Demons are real, but so is the power to drive them away.
Story 2. Girl Behind the Couch.
The scariest night of my life happened when my brother and I stayed at our father's house. The house had a reputation for strange occurrences, small things at first. The microwave cover once shot out of the microwave on its own with enough force to open the door. Objects would fall for no reason, and doors would slam shut without warning. But nothing compared to what I experienced that night. Tired of sharing a room with my brother, I decided to sleep on the couch. It was comfortable, and I figured I would rest better there. I kept the ceiling fan and side lamp on, just enough light to cast a dim glow over the fireplace. Wrapping myself in a blanket, I let my eyelids droop when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow darted past the space between the hallway and the couch. At first, I assumed it was my brother trying to play a prank, but then from behind the couch something began to rise. Black hair crested the top of the cushion, followed by a pale face and deep, almost black eyes. A girl stared at me from just beyond the couch's edge, silent, unblinking. I jolted upright. In that instant, she was gone. I barely had time to process what I saw when I heard it, the sharp squeak of a foot twisting against the kitchen tile. Whatever it was moving rapidly behind me, shifting closer. My body froze, every hair on my skin standing on end. Then instinct took over. I ran, sprinting down the hall. I reached our shared room, careful not to wake my brother as I shut the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest. I did not tell him what happened, but every night after that, whenever I was alone in the living room, I felt it. A presence, watching, waiting, and I knew I was not the only one in that house.
Story 3. Doll That Spoke to Me.
When I was in high school, I worked for my parents who owned an auction business. One day my father and I were tasked with cleaning out a shed from a woman's property. She was a hoarder, so there was a significant amount of work ahead of us. My father was downstairs sorting through items while I went upstairs to box things. As I rummaged through the clutter, I found an old doll, a 1930s horseman, I believe. It was still in its original box. I placed it to the side while I focused on packing a collection of mugs. A short time later, I distinctly heard a woman's voice say something. Assuming the homeowner had come outside to speak with my father, I continued working. A minute or two passed before my father called up. "Was that you?" Since I had been moving mugs that clattered against each other, I casually responded, "Yes." Another moment went by before I stopped to think. "Wait, was what me? Did you say something a minute ago?" my father asked. No, I did not," I replied. A chill ran down my spine. Something about the situation felt deeply unsettling. The voice I had heard was clear, but it had not belonged to me or my father. Despite my unease, I continued working. My gaze drifted back to the doll. An eerie feeling washed over me as I picked it up again. Had I accidentally triggered some kind of sound mechanism? I turned it over, examining every inch for any mechanical or electrical components that could have made it speak. There was nothing. No wind-up key, no battery compartment, no hidden speaker. To this day I wonder what that doll said to me. I know, without a doubt, that I heard it speak, and the thought of it, the fact that it spoke when it should not have, terrifies me more than anything.
Story 4. Curse of Resurrection Mary's Grave.
I live near Chicago, and on Archer Avenue there is a massive cemetery called Resurrection Cemetery. This is where Resurrection Mary is said to be buried. If you are unfamiliar with the legend, she is a well-known ghost who is believed to haunt this stretch of road as a hitchhiking spirit. Years ago, my mother and her friends would visit the cemetery for fun, doing the kinds of things teenagers often do. One particular time, Resurrection Mary's grave had been dug up, either for maintenance or because it was being relocated. One of my mother's friends thought it would be a great idea to lie down inside the open grave. At the time, they all laughed it off as a reckless stunt. But about a year later, that same friend was struck by a car right in front of my mother's house. Tragically, he did not survive. My mother has always believed that this was more than just coincidence, that it was karma for disrespecting the grave. My family has a long history of strange paranormal experiences though. Fortunately, I have never personally encountered anything supernatural. However, I also live near another infamous cemetery, Bachelor's Grove, one of the most haunted cemeteries in the Midwest. My father, a skeptic, even spent the night there multiple times just to prove it was not haunted. Despite his experiences, many still believe that unexplainable things happen there after dark. To this day, my mother's story lingers in my mind. Was it truly karma, or was something else at play? Perhaps some places, some spirits, do not forget those who disturb them.
Story 5. Shadow of Myself.
It was the early 1990s, a time when children could play in store playgrounds without constant supervision. I remember visiting one such place, a furniture store, I believe, where they had a small indoor play area. It was early in the morning, right after the store had opened, and I was the only child there. The playground had a cave-like structure filled with toys. Inside the cave, there was a surveillance camera that displayed its feed on a screen outside, allowing parents and staff to monitor any children inside. Since I saw no one on the screen, I eagerly entered the cave to play. For a few minutes I sat alone, sorting through the toys. The cave was dimly lit, the air slightly stale, and the quietness made the space feel almost too still. Eventually, I grew bored and decided to leave. As I stepped out, I instinctively glanced at the screen outside. My heart stopped. The screen showed a child still inside the cave, someone who looked eerily similar to me, yet not quite the same. Their posture was stiff, their expression unreadable, but I knew for certain I had just been inside and no one else had entered. There was only one way in and out, and I had seen no one pass. Confused, I hesitated before stepping back into the cave. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scanned the space. Empty, there was no one. I swallowed hard and quickly retreated outside. Looking at the screen again, my stomach twisted. The child was gone. I stood frozen, my young mind struggling to process what I had seen. Was it a malfunction, a trick of the light, or had I glimpsed something I was never meant to see? To this day, the image of that child, standing silently in the cave, haunts me. I will never know who or what I saw that day.
Story 6. Demon that watched me sleep.
Ever since I was a child, strange and unexplainable things followed me like shadows lurking in the dark. It started with the creepy demon boy, a figure that loomed in the corners of my childhood bedroom. His hollow eyes bore into me from the darkness, his presence an unspoken terror I could never escape. Then there was the running little girl in my aunt's beach house. She would dart past the doorway, her footsteps light but unnervingly fast. The first time I saw her, I thought she was a real child until I realized she had no face. Years later, the haunting continued in my own home. A one-eyed white cat would sprint through the halls at night. We never had a cat, let alone one so unnatural. Yet, I would hear its claws clicking against the floor, its pale eye gleaming from the shadows before vanishing into nothingness. The most terrifying experience, however, was when I was 15. One night, my room turned ice cold in an instant. The darkness grew heavy, pressing against my skin. Then I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing outside my door. My breath hitched as the doorknob rattled, an unseen force testing its way inside. I knew then that I was not alone. There was something in my room. A figure, small, twisted and hunched over, stood at the foot of my bed. Its eyes were like pits of pure darkness, and its grin stretched unnaturally wide. Fear paralyzed me at first, but then something inside me shifted. Instead of cowering, I stared into the abyss and defied it. My fear faded, replaced by an unshakable resolve. If you are going to take me, then do it now. But if you do, I will find you in the afterlife. And just like that, the cold lifted, the darkness withdrew, and the presence disappeared. It never returned. Perhaps in that moment it realized I was no longer its prey.
Story 7. Echoes of the past.
When I was born, my parents lived in a house built in the 1960s, a house that had once belonged to an elderly woman. I don't know the full details of her life, but the house carried a strange presence. From a very young age, I was visited by a woman in white. Every night, precisely at midnight, I would wake up to see her standing in my bedroom, her pale figure barely visible in the dim light. Despite the fear that gripped me, I always had to steel myself to run through her to reach my parents' room. I would refer to her as my friend Ghost, a title that seemed fitting for someone who never harmed me. She would occasionally call my name, but it never felt threatening, more like a quiet reminder of her presence. There were other strange occurrences too. Our bathroom door would often slam shut on its own, adding to the growing unease in the house. One night, I woke up with a severe case of strep throat and noticed that a desk chair had been left pulled out in my bedroom. To my shock, when I opened my eyes, the woman in white was sitting in the chair, silently watching over me. She didn't move, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was keeping an eye on me. Perhaps as I grew, just as I had grown used to her presence. Years later, I shared my experiences with my mother, and to my surprise, she revealed that she had always suspected the house was haunted. Items would go missing, only to be found in odd places, and furniture would shift without explanation. But she never spoke more of it, possibly for fear of what we could not explain. One of the most unnerving events came in a dream. I dreamed that I woke up in the middle of the night and walked into the kitchen where my parents were preparing breakfast. My mother came around the corner with my deceased grandmother following her. My grandmother looked at me, smiled, and then placed her finger on her lips in a gesture to keep quiet. I woke up, feeling disturbed, and walked to the kitchen, only to find the same scene, my parents cooking breakfast. But my grandmother was gone, just as she had been in the dream. She had passed away several years earlier. The house has since been torn down, replaced by a large mansion, but the memories of what happened within those walls still haunt me, lingering in the corners of my mind like the shadows of the woman in white.
Story 8. Caught in the act of the paranormal.
When I was 25, I worked at the head office of the largest shopping mall company in my country. Back then, I didn't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal. The people around me spoke of certain beings that called our office home, but I dismissed them as nothing more than stories until one strange morning. I arrived early, as usual, and noticed one of the managers at her desk. I greeted her, but she didn't respond. This was odd since she was always the friendliest and most cheerful person in the office. I also noticed she was dressed in a black blazer and a red shirt, which was unusual for her. I shrugged it off and went to my desk to start my day. 5 minutes later, she got up and left the office. I assumed she was just going for coffee, so I continued working. However, when she returned, she was with another manager talking cheerfully as if nothing had happened. But then I noticed something strange. She was wearing a green blouse now. Confused, I asked, "Hey, Miss E, why did you change your outfit?" She looked at me, puzzled. "What do you mean?" I replied. "You were wearing black and red earlier." The other manager with her chuckled and shook his head. "That's impossible. We just got here. Her car broke down, so she carpooled with me today." That moment sent a chill down my spine. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. There was no way she had been in the office earlier. The outfit, the way she acted, it was all wrong. Later, I learned that one of my new co-workers was sensitive to the paranormal. She told me she often felt goosebumps in certain areas of the office, particularly in the cinema. When it had low foot traffic, she could feel something watching her. For her, the worst spot was always that cinema. The atmosphere there felt heavy and oppressive, as if something dark lingered in the shadows. That was the day I started believing.
Story 9. Door that would not stay closed.
It was about 10 years ago when I was just 13. I was watching television with my mum in the living room late at night when I heard my cat messing around in my room down the hall. I got up, went to check on him, and kicked him out of my room, then closed the door behind me. I returned to the living room and resumed watching television. About 3 minutes later, I heard my bedroom door open. This wasn't unusual. If I didn't close my door tightly enough, it would open by itself. I stood up again, checked the room to make sure the cat hadn't sneaked back in, and found everything clear. I made sure the door was properly shut this time, giving it a little shake to ensure it was secure, then sat back down. This is where things started to get truly creepy. Another 3 to 4 minutes passed and I heard the door open again. It was around 1 a.m. and the house was dark except for the light from the television, which made the situation even more unsettling. I turned to my mum and asked, "Did you hear my door open again?" She replied, "Yes." I reluctantly got up and walked down the dark hallway. I approached the door slowly, peered inside, and saw nothing. For a moment, I thought my dad might be playing a prank on me, as he had done in the past. But then I remembered he was at work. That realization sent a chill down my spine. I closed the door once more and returned to the living room, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. Just then, my mum said she was going outside for a smoke, leaving me alone in the house. I sat there trying to calm myself when I heard it again, my door opening by itself. Terrified, I forced myself to get up and close the door once more. It felt like a scene straight out of a horror movie. I slowly walked down the hallway, inching toward my room. As I reached for the door handle, something caught my eye. Out of the shadows to my right, a white hand and arm appeared, reaching out to close the door for me. The arm vanished as quickly as it had appeared, like it had never existed. Frozen in shock, I whispered, "Mum?" But from the end of the hallway, I heard her voice clearly. "What?" That's when the realization hit me. What I had seen was not my mother. The eerie feeling that overwhelmed me left me paralyzed with fear. That night, I didn't sleep in my room. Instead, I crawled into my parents' bed, unable to shake the terror of what I had just witnessed.
Story 10. The Dark Secrets of the Care Facility.
I worked at a nursing home for a couple of years as a nursing assistant. Before that, I spent time in the kitchen as a dietary aide. One night, I walked through the back room, which was tiny, about 10 feet by 10 feet. My bag was on a shelf opposite the door, and I had left a Red Bull there for the morning shift. I had to work just a few hours later. A co-worker of mine had joined me to grab her own bag, which was next to mine. We both turned around at the same time and reached for the light switch next to the door, leading into a small hallway which would take us out of the kitchen. We were about a foot from the switch, both awkwardly stretching up. But before either of us could get to it, we watched as the switch flicked off by itself with a loud click. Both of us gasped. I quickly flicked it on and off several times, but the switch was old and chunky, the kind that only makes noise if you push it hard. There was no way it could have moved on its own. It was definitely on before. Another time, a co-worker of mine was attending to a resident in his room when I heard a loud bang. She ran out of his room, pale as a ghost. She swore that the whiteboard, which was screwed into the wall above a tall dresser, had been torn off the wall and thrown across the room. I went in to check and found 2 large holes in the drywall, each about 3 inches by 3 inches. The whiteboard was still in the corner behind the door, along with the screws and drywall that had been ripped off. There was no way my co-worker could have done that on her own, especially since the board was high up above the dresser and the resident, who was paralyzed, had clearly seen the whole thing. The strangest thing, though, happened after a close resident of mine passed away. I was walking to work the next morning when I swear I saw her lying in her bed as I passed by her room. I didn't know she had passed away the night before, and I was confused, thinking they had filled her bed quickly. But when I went in to check, the room was completely empty. The bed was stripped. I was left feeling unnerved. What really unsettled me, though, was when I had to clean up the bodies of the deceased. Every time I did, it felt as if their eyes were watching me, cold, lifeless eyes that seemed to stare right into my soul. I couldn't handle it anymore and had to leave.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.